He asked, "What's going on, Beth?" Beth had just told him about her plans for a week-long trip to Chicago with her boss, Daniel DeWitt. "I know you might be upset, but it won't affect you too much. I just need to do this for myself. I've been working with him for 6 months and we've developed feelings," she said. "And after this trip, you'll still see him at work. He has a family with 3 kids. What about them?" Johnny pressed. "Those are 2 different things. We plan for this to be a one-time event. When I get back, I'll be the same faithful wife," she explained. Johnny shook his head. "You really think I'll believe nothing has happened between you already?" Beth replied firmly. "No, nothing has happened." "What about his wife?" "That's not your concern. He needs to handle that. Her name is Margaret, right? Their youngest is about 6. Leave her out of this, Johnny. I think he's lying to her. I have a feeling you might be feeding me excuses, too." She looked away and said, "Johnny, I need to do this for closure. Please don't make it harder. I never liked that guy. Now I can't stand him. I might have to take further steps and his family will be impacted too. Johnny, think twice. They have power. My law firm can silence this. Who do you think you are? You've put our marriage at risk. This isn't finished." With that, Johnny turned and left the room. Beth quickly picked up her phone and called Dan. "This didn't go well. We might need to do something." Dan responded sharply. "I told you to keep it quiet. You might have ruined everything. He's going to be surprised. Let's not make things worse. It's not his fault." "I'll take care of it my way," he said before ending the call. Beth felt regret wash over her. She needed to find Johnny, so she hurried up the stairs. The bedroom door was open, but he was gone. His work computer and briefcase were missing, and she heard his motorcycle start. Rushing to the window, she saw him ride off, waving goodbye in a way that felt dismissive. Sitting on the bed, she let a few tears fall. She wanted to reach out and tell him she would cancel her plans and please come back. But as she looked around, she noticed his phone buzzing quietly under the bed, untouched. She felt overwhelmed, and he likely felt the same. She called her dad. Johnny and Beth had met in law school. Beth grew up in a wealthy family, with a father who was a partner in a big law firm. Despite her background, she wanted to do things differently and make a positive impact. She was an attractive woman, tall with blonde hair and blue eyes, always drawing attention. During high school and college, many people admired her, including those who were sporty and some who had different interests. As her senior year approached, she realized that going to a top law school might not happen. She decided to focus more on her studies, worked hard, and got accepted into Lorando School of Law in Virginia. On her first day, she met Johnny. He sat next to her in the orientation class. At first, he seemed quite ordinary. 5'9", slim, with short brown hair and matching eyes, but he had a friendly smile and a nice, warm voice. After the class, he asked if she wanted to get coffee, and she said yes. They talked for a long time over lattes, sharing stories about their lives. Johnny told her about growing up as an army kid, living in different places around the world. His dad was in the military and his mom worked in advertising. He was lucky to have a scholarship for law school and hoped to work in copyright law, especially for software developers. Beth found him really interesting. After their coffee, he walked her to her one-bedroom apartment nearby. At her door, they smiled and shook hands. Even though they had a nice time, she knew he wasn't her usual type. She often preferred men who seemed more assertive and fit. Johnny, aware of their differences, felt a bit out of place. Fortunately, they ended up in the same classes during their first year, organized by their last names. When they met again in constitutional law, he was happy to find a seat next to her was open. He took it as a good sign. After that class, they had more subjects together: torts, criminal law, and contracts. They kept sitting together, often having lunch in the cafeteria. After one class, he suggested they go for coffee again. In a light moment, he jokingly mentioned marriage. She smiled and said, "I think I need to focus on my studies for a while. Maybe we can talk about that next year." "Do you think a woman should wait until she's married for everything?" he asked playfully. "Absolutely not," she replied with a laugh. "Great, because that time has passed." They both chuckled. "Let's start a study group, just you and me and maybe a few others. How does that sound?" he proposed. "Sounds good." We can meet at my apartment, she suggested. Do what? He asked with raised eyebrows, looking a bit teasing. Study, she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Let's start now. Come on. He followed her up the stairs to her door. She unlocked it, stepped inside, and playfully invited him in. Johnny felt a wave of surprise at her spontaneity. Though he had flirted before, Johnny was surprised how quickly things were moving. He thought Beth was a bit impulsive, which he found interesting. Johnny had some experience with relationships. He had met different people, which helped him understand closeness better. Even if he didn't look like a typical heartthrob, he felt confident about connecting with someone when it mattered. As they shared fun moments, it was clear they both enjoyed the spark between them. Soon, they were sitting comfortably on the couch, having a deep talk mixed with light teasing. Johnny noticed Beth's excitement and felt a strong bond growing. He leaned in and they exchanged warm smiles, lost in the moment. I didn't think we'd get this close so fast, he said jokingly. She smiled back. Life can surprise us. Johnny looked at her, drawn to her positive energy. They both sensed their evening had taken a wonderful turn, leading to a special connection. Beth moved off the couch and playfully teased him, saying, We do mix well together. Their moment together left him feeling amazed. As they shared this feeling, she smiled and playfully challenged him with her eyes. He could tell she enjoyed their back and forth, making him feel both excited and a bit vulnerable. You might drive me a little wild, Beth, he said, still joking. She smiled again, seeming in control of their fun, leaving him curious about what would happen next. Later, they shared a quiet moment. This has been really eye-opening, she said. I feel the same. Where did you learn to be so charming? He asked. Here and there. I haven't always been on the right path. There's always been a bit of mischief in me. What about you? He laughed. I have my own tricks. I don't always play by the rules. I see. You know how to win people over. I was definitely drawn to you, she replied with a smile. I'm glad to hear that. How about we get cleaned up and grab some food before we study? She suggested cheerfully. After dinner, they studied hard together until midnight before falling asleep soon after. The next morning, they arrived to class on time, sharing a light-hearted moment before the start. In that first week, they welcomed 2 new classmates, Thomas Kennedy and Jason Burke, along with a woman named Mary Lester to their study group. Mary was a charming brunette, while Thomas was a strong presence with a football background who had suffered a knee injury. Jason was another friendly addition. Everyone was doing well in their studies. As the semester went on, Beth and Johnny kept a relaxed balance, often visiting each other's homes while also making new friends. Beth encouraged Johnny to enjoy his time with Mary, and she promised not to get involved with Jason or Thomas, though she felt a bit sad about that last promise. Thomas was the kind of guy she liked, but she knew jealousy could easily break up their study group. Still, there were many other guys on campus who were her type. On weekends, Johnny spent time with several female students. He advised Beth to be careful about her own relationships, too. She agreed. The holiday break came and went, and the new semester felt much like the first. Both of them earned excellent grades. As summer approached, Beth told Johnny she would be going to Italy for 6 weeks with her mom and younger sister. Her dad would join them for part of the trip. During the summer, Johnny worked on a sailboat, taking people out on the Chesapeake Bay. When he returned to school, he looked healthy and fit. When Beth saw him again, they quickly fell back into their easy connection. Their chemistry was still strong. Beth loved her time with Johnny. They had a special bond, and she valued their relationship. They talked about their feelings and agreed they might not be ready to be completely exclusive yet, deciding it was okay to explore other connections outside their relationship, but not in their shared apartment. They were splitting the rent. Johnny had recently made some good money from selling 2 copyrights to a government agency, giving him both a lump sum and monthly payments. He had financial stability, but they rarely discussed money matters. Beth was always financially secure herself and didn't worry about how Johnny managed his portion. By the end of their second year, they had grown into a more exclusive couple. There was no formal pact. They just stopped dating others. That summer, instead of going abroad with her mother, Beth and Johnny decided to spend 6 weeks at a resort in West Virginia, sharing the costs. The resort had a lot of activities like horseback riding, tennis, golf, and a big pool. Beth admired Johnny's athletic skills. He seemed to excel in everything he tried, though he remained humble about it. One day, after Johnny did well in tennis, Beth invited him to go hiking. She said, "Remember when you said we could talk about our future when I was ready? Well, I'm ready to chat about it now." He smiled and replied, "We can start planning when we get back." In her excitement, she hugged him tightly. Their 3rd year of law school flew by, and they got married a month after graduation. Her family wanted a big celebration. They had their ceremony at an Episcopal church in D.C., followed by a reception at a hotel in Bethesda. Johnny had the chance to meet many people, including lawyers and some well-known politicians. At first, Johnny's parents felt a bit overwhelmed by all of it. His dad, Hank, who had been in the Army, adjusted quickly, while his mom, Esther, thought it was a unique experience but stayed supportive. After some time, Johnny wrote a thank you note to his mom, thanking her for her patience during some difficult moments. When she got it, she showed it to Hank, and they both had a good laugh. Hank was very fond of his new daughter-in-law, but Esther had some worries. She shared her thoughts with Johnny when he told her about the marriage. Johnny understood her concerns but was sure about his choice, promising her that if things didn't go well, he would notice in time to make changes. Despite her good intentions, Beth went to work for her father's firm. Johnny rented a small office near D.C. to start his own practice. With income from 3 copyrights and another one in the works, he was getting familiar with how things worked at the copyright office. Johnny also had a group of friends in coding who sent work his way. His practice was doing well apart from the money he made from copyrights. Beth's father asked the couple to sign a prenuptial agreement, which Johnny agreed to without any fuss. The agreement was simple. They would keep their finances separate and share household costs evenly, taking into account Beth's health insurance. William Brady, Beth's father, had looked into Johnny before the marriage and found out about his military family and modest income. However, he didn't know about Johnny's most valuable copyright, which made him underestimate Johnny's financial success. In reality, Johnny was quite well off because of his new copyrights, and he put that money into investments. Johnny didn't share this financial success with Beth. In contrast, she often talked about her experiences at the law office, where she worked hard to prove herself, fighting against the belief that she was just given a job because of her father. Despite the challenges, Beth showed how capable she was. She worked hard and built a reputation for being smart and professional, earning a place of responsibility without depending on her father's help. After 3 years, she was on track for a partnership and earning a good salary. Johnny felt proud of her work at the firm and believed in her skills. While he sometimes worried about the long hours she put in, he recognized her dedication to succeed. Their home life was happy. They both enjoyed movies, books, and music, although Beth wasn't as fond of classic country music, which Johnny liked. He wore earphones to enjoy the music by himself. In their relationship, they kept a strong bond. After busy times, they often found happiness in being together, with a song sometimes setting the mood for their moments. The bed never actually glowed. Johnny's work quietly advanced. It was a unique field and stayed off Beth's firm's radar. He also gained several new copyrights. The government had the first choice on those, and they paid well. Johnny set up a limited liability company called TLC to manage his projects and investments. His law practice was separate, and he was the only owner of TLC. So Johnny easily covered his share of the bills, and Beth did too. In her 4th year, she got a case under Dan DeWitt, a partner at the firm. The case needed a major SEC filing to help with a merger between 2 software companies. It was expected that other agencies might get involved since both companies had important software that could give them a big edge in the market. Beth and Dan worked closely from the beginning, along with a team of 6 other lawyers. About 2 months into the project, Johnny met Dan at the firm's holiday party. Before that, he had only seen Dan and his family at firm events. Now, he and Beth sat at a table with Dan and his wife Margie. Dan was 43 and Margie was 35. They had 3 kids, a boy and 2 girls, aged 10, 8, and 6. Margie shared pictures of each child and of them playing together. Johnny liked Margie a lot. She was of average height with bright red hair, a warm smile, and a friendly spirit. She worked part-time as a librarian at a local high school. Johnny learned all this while they talked at dinner as their partners discussed work. After dinner, as the music changed for dancing, Johnny was surprised when Dan immediately asked Beth to dance. Beth looked at Johnny, who frowned slightly. Still, she took Dan's hand and went to the dance floor. Turning to Margie with raised eyebrows, Johnny was happy when she smiled and invited him to dance too. Margie was a wonderful dancer. Johnny was used to Beth's more careful style. With his natural athletic skill, he quickly found a groove with Margie as they danced along to the music. They enjoyed a lively jitterbug, followed by a fast dance and then a slow one. Johnny felt a bond with Margie, and she seemed to feel it too. However, after the slow dance, he suggested, "Maybe we should dance with our partners." Margie gave him a small look of disappointment, but agreed. She said, "Dan has a bit of trouble on the dance floor. I need to remember that." She smiled, looking toward their table. Dan and Beth were already sitting down when they got back. Dan had taken Johnny's chair. Johnny offered his hand to Beth, and she hesitated only for a moment before taking it and letting him guide her to the dance floor. They enjoyed a lovely time dancing to a song with a nice beat. When a slow song started, Beth said, "I see you had fun with Margaret. Definitely, she's a great dancer. I could tell. She must have had some training. She works as a librarian. She just has good moves. Yes, her dancing really stood out to me." "No worries, Beth. I noticed your boss didn't ask me about dancing with you." "Well, he's not very polite. Does that mean he just takes what he wants, Beth?" "Johnny, come on. He and I just work together. He has his own family. As long as he doesn't create problems for my responsibilities. You be careful, Beth." "Got it, counselor." The rest of the night went well, but Johnny felt something wasn't right. Over the next few months, Johnny paid closer attention to what Beth said about her work and their talks at home. Before and a little after the holiday gathering, Beth talked a lot about Dan and the team. She couldn't share details about their work, but she mentioned personal things, Dan's kids, what others were dating, and some office chatter. However, in the last couple of months, while she still shared some gossip, Dan barely came up. Johnny noticed this change. He decided to look into Dan, the company, and the upcoming merger. He already knew some about the merger. Blackburn Company, the bigger of the two companies, wanted to buy Newstar. Johnny had done some work with Newstar before and had allowed them to use some code, which helped his small business earn money. Newstar's right to use the code couldn't be transferred without TLC's permission. As Johnny researched further, he discovered that the merger wouldn't change that rule. This meant that for the new company to use his code, they would still need TLC's approval. All the required documents were managed by TLC's legal team, including Jerry Dolan, one of the few workers at TLC. Johnny wondered why Beth was connected to this deal since TLC was involved. He thought that as the owner of TLC, his name shouldn't appear in any public documents. There were tax forms, but none would show his company name and should remain private. Maybe the company didn't know about his role, which he thought was a major mistake. However, neither Beth nor anyone else had said anything to him, even though he could make the merger difficult. Johnny had a security firm look into Beth's law firm, Carrington and Brady, focusing on the team managing the merger and the main partners, including William Brady, Beth's father. He received a report with information from casual chats with staff and their families, along with general observations at the firm. Nothing stood out too much, except for the fact that Beth and Dan DeWitt often went to lunch together, usually without any other colleagues. "DeWitt here. I wanted to talk to you about Beth," he said. Johnny felt a bit worried. "What about her?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. There was a short pause before DeWitt replied, "I think we should go over her upcoming work plans. It's important for both of us to stay clear on things." Johnny raised an eyebrow, sensing something was off. "Clear? What do you mean?" "I mean that there are plans in progress, and we need to make sure we are on the same page. I want to avoid any mix-ups," DeWitt said casually, but with a hint of seriousness. "Okay, I'll make sure to keep the lines open," Johnny said, feeling cautious about the talk, but trying to stay professional. Meanwhile, Beth and Dan were trying to figure out their feelings. Their connection was strong, but they both understood the complications it brought to their lives. They had lunch at Mason's, where their conversation flowed easily and laughter filled the air. Dan proposed a trip to Chicago, framing it around work talks but suggesting they could enjoy their time together without raising eyebrows. However, Beth felt conflicted. The idea of the trip was tempting, but her commitment to Johnny was a heavy weight on her mind. "I appreciate the offer, but I really have to think of Johnny," Beth said at last, her voice full of uncertainty. Dan nodded, even though he had already booked the trip. He viewed Johnny as someone who could be easily set aside if needed, but Beth's loyalty made him question the situation. After talking about the trip with Johnny, they faced an unexpected problem. The last thing Dan wanted was for Johnny to reach out to Margie about the plans. He thought carefully about how to keep the situation manageable. The next morning, Dan arranged to call Johnny, who was unsure about the discussion but curious enough to listen. "Hold for Mr. DeWitt," came the message. Johnny hesitated but decided to stay on the line, wondering what DeWitt was thinking. As they talked, Johnny remained cautious, knowing it was important to handle personal and work matters carefully. "Bishop, I'm calling to discuss possible issues if you talk to my wife about the trip to Chicago," DeWitt said. "Yeah?" Johnny replied. DeWitt took a moment before saying anything more. "You might face serious problems at work if you talk to her about this." "How? You can't hurt me." "This company is one of the biggest in the country. If we decide to act, it will affect you." "You're very full of yourself, DeWitt. You don't know my job or how it could impact you. If you get involved in my life, I'll do what I need to protect myself." DeWitt was now annoyed. "Go ahead and try. I'm not stepping back, and nothing you do will change that." As he finished speaking, the line went silent. Johnny stopped the recording and saved the call on his phone to share with Beth later. Next, he joined a conference call with Jerry Dolan and Rick Maynard, the investigator he had hired to look into Beth's company. "Listen closely, guys, and make sure to record this," he said, as he played the phone call with DeWitt. After it ended, Maynard said, "That guy seems dangerous. What could he do to you?" "He doesn't seem to know who I am or what I'm capable of. I want you to keep an eye on him and the company and find out their plans. I need to know if they try to dig into my finances, licenses, taxes, and such. If they try that, it could lead to big legal problems." Maynard replied, "Okay, but that could be tricky." "I understand. Do what you can. I'll send you all my account information." Jerry Dolan said, "What about the merger? I'm not sure how important the license is for them. They haven't made many moves towards getting an agreement." "We'll wait and see. It might matter a lot. I have a stable income from the license. Maybe I should think about its worth again." Johnny decided to head home. He had tried to call Beth at work, but they told him she was off for the day. When he called her cell, it went straight to voicemail, and he started to feel worried about her. When he got home, she wasn't there. He noticed some of her things were missing, like her toothbrush and laptop. Using a phone tracking app, he found out she was at her parents' house about 5 miles away. He ordered a pizza, opened a beer, and had a simple dinner. After that, he got in his car and drove to the Brady's home. The lights were on, and there were several cars in the driveway, indicating some sort of gathering. He parked near the entrance, got out, and walked up to the door. There was no music playing. He rang the doorbell. Beth's mother, Livia, answered the door. She looked worried but let him in. "You should come in, Johnny," she said softly. In the living room, he saw Beth sitting next to her father, William, along with 2 lawyers from the firm he recognized, and DeWitt. William said, "We were just discussing you, Johnny, about what to do regarding everything happening right now." "Oh? Have you made a decision?" "Well, we wanted to reach out to you so we could talk. All of us." "Okay, let's talk. I'm curious if your group plans to take a tough stance. That's what was hinted at before. And your daughter?" "We'd prefer not to take any drastic measures." William kept his calm demeanor. Johnny looked at Beth. "Are you still planning to be with him?" Livia quickly interjected. "Johnny, don't be rude." "Sorry, Livia, but that's what Beth said earlier. Of course I'm interested." DeWitt opened his mouth to speak, but William signaled him to stay quiet. William said, "Johnny, you should know that these workplace relationships happen. It's common with the job pressure and shared challenges. So what do you want me to do? Just let things unfold. What's the harm in waiting a week? William's face was serious. Johnny replied, That's not happening. If she goes, that's the end for us. If she leaves with me tonight, maybe we can fix things. I hope so. William remarked, Maybe we're at a standstill. Johnny focused on Beth. Forget all this. The car is outside. Come home with me so we can talk without this stress. DeWitt got up from his seat. Johnny stood as well, feeling his size. Johnny chuckled lightly. Come on, let's see what you've got. He held out his hands. William urged DeWitt to sit down. Stop! Stop! Beth shouted. DeWitt hesitated, then sat down again. Johnny stayed standing, watching Beth. Now or never. She smiled, remembering a song they both liked. Johnny sang softly, Tomorrow will be too late. It's now or never. My feelings can't wait. Beth rose and walked toward Johnny. She looked him in the eyes and said, I can come home tonight, but I need to make my own choices. Johnny replied, I'm truly sorry to hear that. The invitation is off the table. As for you, I'll follow the right steps to address my concerns before you leave. William stood up, saying, That would be a significant mistake, Johnny. I won't hold back. Johnny pointed at William. You talk a big game, but it doesn't mean much. Let's see. He turned to leave, but noticed a strong man by the door. Johnny hurried up the stairs as he saw the figure. He knew this house well and could hear heavy footsteps behind him. Turning a corner, he stopped and waited. As the footsteps got closer, Johnny stuck his foot out, causing DeWitt to trip. He quickly moved down the stairs. DeWitt was now near the door. Without thinking, Johnny jumped from the last step and collided with DeWitt as he tried to dodge him. DeWitt fell down hard. As Johnny left the house, he might have accidentally brushed against DeWitt, but Johnny didn't turn around. He was worried about what might happen next. He got to his car and climbed in just before he saw William and Beth come out of the door. He started the engine and drove away. On the way home, Johnny thought about what happened with DeWitt. He worried that DeWitt was in bad shape after their encounter. So he parked far from his house and walked quickly there. There were no police around. Johnny entered through the back, grabbed a few things, and left the same way. There was still no sign of law enforcement. He returned to his car and drove away from the neighborhood. He decided to stay at an apartment that his law firm used for guests. Knowing where the key was, he went there, set up his computer, and tried to relax. He used the computer to check the security system at home. Everything looked normal. He turned off the lights and locked the doors, changing the code to keep Beth away. Soon he fell asleep. Meanwhile, at the Brady home, DeWitt started to feel better after a while. With help from Beth and Livia, he sat down in a chair, supporting his head with one hand and resting the other in his lap, making soft sounds of discomfort. Did you call the police? He asked. William replied, No, we were in a tricky situation. DeWitt might have recorded what happened. I thought we could handle it ourselves, but I see now that was a mistake. DeWitt said, Let's move forward as we planned. Beth interrupted, No, this has gone too far. I feel responsible. She became overwhelmed and left the room. Beth went to her old room, locked the door, and sat in a chair, trying to calm down and think about what had happened over the last few days. William looked at DeWitt, noticing the bruise forming above his ear. DeWitt seemed a bit shaky, and Livia brought him a glass of orange juice. The other lawyers had already left. William gently placed his hand on DeWitt's knee. You and Beth have both made mistakes. If she weren't my daughter, I would seriously think about her actions. We haven't done anything terrible yet, and she is your daughter. If Johnny carries out his threats, what will you do then? I have my own family to think about. We will be all right. We haven't done anything too serious yet. That counts for something. Then, nothing more should happen between you and Beth. Understood? Yes. Can she be replaced on the SEC matter? Well, maybe. It won't be easy. But yes, that needs to happen. I don't want you two working together anymore. I like Johnny, and I think Beth has been making some wrong choices. You both have messed up. Livia said, Many people are making similar choices. That brought the conversation to a pause. She looked at William. She stood up and left the room. DeWitt said, I see you haven't kept things to yourself, especially with Julia and the others. That's not your business, Dan, William replied, looking uneasy. DeWitt got to his feet. He swayed slightly, but then steadied himself. Walking around helped him feel more in control. He turned to Brady and said, "I think I should talk to Beth." "Don't do that. What good will it bring?" "You and the others have these little chats. It's part of the job. I haven't done much of that thinking it was risky. But my connection with Beth is different. We click. I don't want to lose that." William felt unsure. It was true that co-workers sometimes formed secret relationships. There had been one complaint that was quietly resolved. DeWitt was important to the company, especially during tough times. He was leading a crucial case for the firm. William knew he couldn't lose DeWitt, and DeWitt was aware of this too. Then there was William's own marriage, which seemed shaky after what Livia had said. William said, "Dan, she's married. Until now, her marriage was strong, but now it looks weak. If you keep going this way with her, she might lose her marriage." DeWitt responded, "I really care about her. It was just a moment in time. That's not the issue. That moment could lead to more if what you say is true. I want to see where this goes. I met her husband. He probably won't come back to her after her wish to go to Chicago." William thought for a moment and then said, "I'll talk to her." He knocked on Beth's door. No answer. He knocked harder and called out, "Beth, we need to talk about this. Dan is waiting." Beth heard him. She had been thinking about her choices. She cared for Johnny, but also had feelings for Dan. But Dan was married with children, so he was off limits except for friendship. She wanted both Johnny and Dan and was trying to figure out how to balance that when her father knocked. She got up and opened the door. They walked to the living room in silence. When she arrived, she felt relieved to see that Dan looked alert but stressed. She thought he was lucky to have avoided a bigger conflict with Johnny. She worried that Johnny might hurt Dan. She said, "Dan, you can't confront Johnny. He's really angry and he could hurt you." Dan frowned. "He's small and quick, yes, but I could handle him." William wanted to stop any trouble. He agreed with Beth about how that could turn out. He said, "It's simple. No matter who wins, you both will end up with nothing. Let's not fight." Dan looked at Beth. "What do you really want, Beth?" "I want everything, of course." "Like what?" "I want to marry Johnny, and I still want a relationship with you. I was trying for that, but maybe I approached it wrong. I still want both, but if I have to choose, I'd choose marriage. I'm sorry. You'd feel the same." Dan replied, "I'm not so sure about that. You can't be sure either. We won't know until we try." Beth nodded and said, "But if we try, he would definitely leave me. If he knew, maybe, but he might not. I wish you had gone with the plan. If I did and we got caught, he'd leave me for sure." She paused. "I don't want that. I really don't." William spoke up. "Let me see what I can do. He's upset now, but maybe he'll calm down." Beth asked, "And if he doesn't?" "I don't know yet. I'll think about it." DeWitt asked, "Beth, are we still going to Chicago on Friday?" She replied, "Let's see. Don't cancel the hotel or flight just yet." She stood up and headed upstairs. DeWitt left soon after, and William went to his room feeling uncertain. The door was open, so he stepped inside. Livia was there, sitting up in bed and reading. She looked at him and said, "You made a fool of me for years. Who's the fool now?" "Me, I guess. But you know I love you." "I know. Some kind of love, at least." He sat on the bed and leaned over to kiss her forehead. Even in her mid-50s, she was still attractive, a more grown-up version of their daughter. They shared a bond, although it wasn't often. William had found other ways to deal with the stress of being a provider, and now they needed to settle things since the truth was out. Thinking of others while William supported her made her feel good. As always, William was attentive, and she appreciated it. Livia said, "Thanks, that was nice." William felt happy to hear that. He decided to wait until morning for a more serious conversation. They both drifted off to sleep peacefully. The next morning, before they left for work, Beth called Johnny. She was surprised when he answered. "What is it?" "I want to invite you to dinner. We need to talk." "What?" "Your father will have someone ready to confront me again. Your family is a lot." "Not at their house, silly. At a nice restaurant, my treat. Maybe Rosario's." After a pause, Johnny replied, "What time?" 7. I'll book a table." "Okay. But Beth, if things aren't good, it might get tense." "I care about you, Johnny. I had nothing to do with what happened at my parents' house." "See you then." He hung up. After work that day, Johnny returned home, feeling cautiously hopeful. He had spent the day going through the documents filed that morning about the merger. Many people were working on it. A key point was that the issue with the TLC license was downplayed in a short comment, suggesting the license had transferred without issues. Johnny felt confused. He was surprised to realize that the license was more important than he had thought. If not, why was there a need for secrets? He chose to dress simply for dinner and arrived 10 minutes late. Beth was waiting in a quiet booth. She stood up to greet him with a hug. He accepted it, though he felt a bit uneasy. They sat down and he asked, "Why are we here? You were clear before." "I want to talk about everything, Johnny. My dad, well, he has had some outside relationships at work. I thought I could handle it. Dan wanted to keep it hidden. I didn't. Maybe I was wrong. But please don't tell his wife." "I haven't made up my mind, Beth. She deserves to know if things get serious." "Is that a threat?" "It's just how I feel. I met her. I respect her. I want to be clear that my relationship with Dan is just that, nothing more. We got close during the case. There was some flirting. He has his appealing points. So, are you saying you would go after him?" Well, yes, but I don't want to lose you." "You just did." Johnny stood up and walked towards the door. Beth was shocked by his sudden move. She thought they could talk it out calmly. She stood up and followed him, drawing the attention of other diners. "Wait, please, I won't do it, Johnny." He kept walking. She caught up with him outside at his car, and he let her come closer. He faced her, silently looking at her. "I won't do it. I won't." She was upset, but her tears were more from frustration than true sadness. "What do you mean, you won't go to Chicago? You won't pursue Dan? Or do you mean you'll stay true to your promises? All of it." "Johnny, I love you. I won't be with anyone else." "Ever?" "Well, as long as you're alive and we're married." She shook her head. But she was a lawyer, just as he was. He sighed. She said, "Come back to dinner." He went back inside with her. More curious looks followed. They sat down again. The waiter came to ask about drinks, and they ordered a bottle of wine. They sat in silence until their orders arrived. Then Beth asked, "Why is this so important to you? That my wife stays faithful? Doesn't run off with another man? Do I really need to explain? You could have your fun too, that would be fair." "Maybe I should ask Dan about his wife, see if he would like that." "You wouldn't." "Oh, if you can be with him, why can't I talk to his wife? She seems nice and fun." Beth felt cornered. She realized Johnny could charm Margie. She had seen them together at the holiday party. I don't think he would. He probably wouldn't agree to that. They have kids. Oh, so that's what matters. Kids? Once a wife has kids, she can't be free. But you can? No! I didn't mean that. She was frustrated. She was the successful lawyer. But Johnny had put Beth in a tough spot. He said, "You big-time lawyers think you can do anything. Your dad has affairs. It's common for people like him. So you want to do the same?" "No. Well, maybe I did get a bit too confident." She looked down, then said, "Can we go back to normal now?" "I doubt it. Are you working with him?" "Yes, if there's a case after the filing. And there will be. I worked with him for 6 months. I like him, but I can keep my distance." "But would you, Beth?" "If I promise to stay true to us, I will. You made vows at our wedding. Are you staying true?" "So far. But I'm confused by how you feel. Being with Dan would just be distraction. It would help with the tension between us. Why is this such a big deal?" "I don't know. I guess I need to think some more. But Beth, if you get involved with him, you need to talk to me first. You can choose what to do, but I can react however I want. Right now, that means we might need to separate. Think it over." She still had some hope. "Do I get Margie?" Beth was surprised. "No, leave her alone. She has kids." "It would just be friendly, Beth. Ask him, see what he thinks. It could be a test of character." Beth smiled. "If I ask him, he might confront you." "Beth, he can't do much to me unless he has some big plan. Is he going to do that?" "No." "Then ask. I'm curious." "Okay, you asked for it." They finished their meal, but the issue was still uncertain. Beth asked, "Should I come back home? I don't like staying at my parents' house, especially now that things had changed with her mom." "Okay. It's our house. I'll see you there?" "Yep." As Johnny drove home, he thought about her last comment. He began to wonder if Livia was the smartest among them. Beth moved back in. She hadn't brought much, so it was easy. They didn't talk a lot, but when Johnny came out of the shower and saw Beth, he paused for a moment. Then he decided to join her in bed. The next morning, Johnny reminded Beth to ask about Margie. She rolled her eyes. At work, he got Margie's cell number and called her. When she answered, Johnny said, "Margie, it's Johnny Bishop." "Hi, how are you?" "I'm fine. I was wondering if I could take you to lunch." "Oh, that's unexpected." She sounded careful. "I wanted to talk about our spouses. They've been working closely together for a while now." "Ah, I see. And you think we should do what?" "Meet and talk." "Okay, where?" "Silvio's on Carter?" "Sure. 12:30? See you there." They met at 12:30 and sat in a booth. Johnny realized that his first impression of Margie was right. She was indeed very attractive, with beautiful red hair. "It's great to see you, Margie," he said, offering a warm smile. Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Are you showing some interest?" "Maybe a little. By the way, has Dan mentioned the work trip to Chicago next week?" "Yes, they are almost done with the paperwork. They don't really have business there. It was supposed to be just Beth and Dan, not for work." Margie paused, looking thoughtful. "I've always been curious about that law firm, but Dan hasn't ever mentioned anything, at least not to me. He wanted Beth to keep it from me, but she just told me she needed a week with Dan." Margie's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "We have kids. He's a good father when he's around." Beth thinks their connection is just a way to cope with the stress from work. "I don't believe that." "I don't either. There have been some warnings made by Dan and William. I'm not okay with that. If they try something risky, I'll handle it." "What warnings?" "They wanted me to keep this from you, but I thought you should know." "Thanks. I appreciate it." She smiled softly. Johnny smiled back, and they both felt an unexpected bond. It was strong and immediate. "Wow," Margie sighed almost dreamily. Johnny said, "I told Beth that if she ran off with Dan, I'd come after you." "I told her to share that with Dan." Margie chuckled lightly. "He won't be happy about that." "And you?" "I think I would be okay with it, but it would really shake up my life." "Why? It's just a situation." "It wouldn't be just that, Johnny." She looked at him intently. "Maybe not, Margie, but you know what? It could be exciting. You're married, but if we considered it and they did too, you could leave her. I have 3 kids and Dan is a good father to them. Up until now, he's been faithful, but he was planning to deceive you." "True." She looked sad, lost in thought. "Margie, you are a truly amazing person. If they wanted to change things, I'd be open to it. But as you said, you have more at stake. We might never have anything steady." A spark lit up her face. "A temporary arrangement, huh? Now you've caught my attention." She moved a bit closer, her eyes shining. Just then, their waiter arrived, giving them an interested glance. "Could I get some coffee, please?" Johnny asked. The waiter nodded and went to place their order. Margie said, "If they head to Chicago, you can spend time with me while they're away." "Deal. Do you think Dan will agree?" "We'll just have to wait and see." "I'm hoping." She leaned closer to Johnny. Just then, the waiter came back with their coffee. Johnny didn't feel shy, and he was glad to see that Margie wasn't either. He said, "Let's enjoy this drink and see what happens." That's what they did. Johnny thought about asking Margie to meet later, but felt it would not be right to Beth. Beth was his wife. If she stayed loyal, he would too. When Beth saw Dan at work, she asked to speak privately. They went into his office. She said, "If I go to Chicago or start something with you, Johnny will leave me, unless—" "What do you mean?" "Margie. What about her?" "He might be open to a change. I take you, and he takes her." Dan's face turned red, and he stood up quickly. "That's it. I'm going to talk to him." "Oh? Like you tried the other night?" "I'd be cautious if I were you." "I didn't mean that. I'll speak to him about his business." "Why? You want to be with his wife, and he wants yours in return. Seems fair, right?" "No. And even if it is fair, I won't go along with it. Margie wouldn't either. She's a mother. She's a woman. They seem to get along well at that party. Maybe you should ask her about it. We'd have a whole week to sort things out." He looked at her. "I won't. That's my decision. We can just go to a hotel this afternoon." I guess you don't want me as much as I thought. Johnny is aware. Leave him alone, and me too." She walked out of the office. That night when Dan got home, Margie was there, but the kids weren't. They were with her mom. Margie was in the living room and nothing was ready for dinner. Dan suddenly felt anxious. He asked, "What's going on?" "You were planning to go to Chicago to see Johnny's wife, all while lying. What were you thinking?" I got close to her at work, all the partners. But you didn't do anything until now. I still haven't, but it seemed like you were going to, if Johnny hadn't stepped in. Beth refused to agree to his idea. Unbelievable, he said. He's not the one at fault here. You and his wife started this mess. I told her you wouldn't go along with it. He paused. But you would, wouldn't you? You want him? Yes, I do. So there. Margie seemed annoyed, but after saying this, she looked more energized. Dan stepped back. I can't. No. Even for a week with someone as interesting as Beth? Dan didn't answer. Margie moved closer and he felt overwhelmed. She leaned in and whispered, You have to be more appealing than he is. You'd make Beth very happy. We have kids and I'm not. Why are you interested, if I'm so much more appealing? Dan, Johnny and I might connect. I'm drawn to him, even if he doesn't match up to you. Dan felt himself drifting away, struggling with the feelings. Margie noticed and leaned in closer, keeping his attention. She drew him closer, her energy clear and strong. It was a way she often approached things when she wanted something, and once again it worked. Dan felt a rush of excitement. Margie took charge, saying firmly, Take off your pants. He did, feeling exposed. Margie stood tall and confident, asking, What do you want, Danny? I want you to be with me. Say please, she pushed him. Oh, please, Margie, please be with me. She replied with focus, her eyes locked on him. Dan felt lost but also enchanted. He gave in to the moment, overwhelmed by the feelings. As the moment reached its height, Margie paused, studying him. He was still trying to catch his breath. She smiled softly and said, Danny, I'm going to make my own choices, whether you join me or not. It's up to you. You don't make things easy, he said quietly, a hint of surrender in his voice. No, but you prefer it that way. He stayed silent. Danny, who's in charge here? Danny? You are. You're lucky I understand you, Danny. And you're lucky I'm letting this happen, she replied, steering the situation. I know. I'm a fortunate man, he said, accepting her control. She rarely took charge, but when she did, he always noticed. Asking him to embrace something as big as Johnny was risky, yet it seemed to be working. She moved purposefully, reminding him of her hold over everything that had happened. She leaned in and said softly, You're strong, but you're mine now. Her words hung in the air. He didn't respond but felt he had given in. She had control, and he accepted it fully. Afterward, she got up and left him in a daze. She went to the kitchen while he slowly regained his thoughts. He headed upstairs to shower, the warm water clearing his mind. The reality of what happened started to settle in. His faithful marriage had taken a turn, and everything he knew felt like it was changing. As he reflected, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The idea of this new arrangement troubled him, but he knew it was a path he had somewhat agreed to take. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget it. That's what she wanted, Johnny's presence instead of his. Thinking about this brought up mixed feelings. It wasn't the first time in their marriage that he had thought about her being with another man. Back before they had kids, their friend Damon often teased Margie. She would flirt back, and Dan felt a jolt of excitement. He imagined them slipping away together. Damon never actually acted on those feelings, but Dan had thought about it a lot back then. Damon moved away, and the thoughts faded. Dan hadn't truly figured out why he reacted this way. He noticed his own patterns, but felt uneasy about them. When Margie admitted she liked Johnny, it made Dan feel uncertain. He couldn't help but feel upset. How could this happen? But deep down, he knew it wasn't really Margie's fault. She wouldn't have been interested in Johnny if he and Beth hadn't planned their own trip away. As the water in the shower cooled down, so did his frustration. He turned off the water, stepped out, and continued to think. Even though he felt uneasy, he couldn't ignore his deeper feelings. Dan was someone who stayed calm and thought things through, which helped him in his job. He tried to apply the same thinking here. He got dressed and went downstairs, hearing Margie in the kitchen. She was enjoying a snack, and when she saw him, she smiled playfully. "Please don't make this harder, Margie," he said. Her smile widened. "Only when we're alone, Dan," she teased. "Like now." Meanwhile, Johnny and Beth spent a quiet evening at home. They shared a peaceful moment before going to bed without talking about their future plans. The next day at work, Dan walked into Beth's office. "We're ready for Chicago," he said. Beth looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "We're set. I agreed to let Margie spend time with Johnny." "I didn't expect that," Beth replied, clearly confused. Dan explained, "It's because I care about you, Beth, enough to let Margie be with Johnny." Beth's confusion shifted to happiness. "Well then, what should we do for fun in Chicago?" They excitedly began to plan their time together in the city. Meanwhile, Johnny received a call from Margie. "Lunch?" she asked. "Sure. Same place as usual. I've got big news." They met at their usual spot. Johnny, curious, asked, "So what's the news?" Dan agreed. "We have the whole week. The kids will be with my mom from Thursday to next Saturday." Margie smiled brightly, and Johnny felt a surge of excitement. He scooted closer to her in the booth. With a playful grin, Margie asked, "All this time just for me?" They had their usual waiter, who seemed interested in their energy when he came over to take their drink order. Margie gave him a warm smile, but kept her focus on Johnny. "Bring us half a bottle of the house white," Margie said. "Right away, ma'am," the waiter replied as he walked off. Margie chuckled. "I think he's used to seeing us now and maybe wonders what's going on." Johnny laughed too. "If you keep teasing like that, I'll need to catch my breath." They shared a laugh, then continued their lunch, enjoying the excitement of their upcoming plans. He pulled back his hand and offered her his napkin. Margie tried to clean up a bit, and then put the damp napkin on the table. Soon the waiter came back to take their orders and noticed the napkin. Johnny ordered a salad, while Margie chose a small quiche. As the waiter was about to leave, he picked up the napkin and said, "I'll bring you a dry one." He left quickly. Johnny thought he saw the waiter inspecting the napkin as he went through the kitchen door. The two of them enjoyed their meal without any more secretive gestures. They talked about their week, mostly deciding whose house to visit on which day. Johnny said, "I think we should stay at both homes." Margie laughed. "You're being cheeky, Johnny." "That's true, my friend, very true." Just 2 days until their plans began. On Wednesday evening, Johnny and Beth talked about everything. Beth felt unsure about what they were planning. She said, "Johnny, you won't start liking this woman, will you?" "I don't think so. She's older and has kids, but I do find her interesting." "I know. Oh, I know. You'll have your special time for a week. That should help. It's just, I want you to know that I love you. When this is over, if we go ahead with it, I'm afraid things will change between us. Can we say we are the same now? You just told me you were going to be with another man. I'm sorry for that. I was wrong. But then you turned it all around. You're going to leave her very happy and share that happiness everywhere." They both laughed for a while before Beth playfully leaned in closer. On Friday morning, Johnny dropped Beth off at Dan and Margie's home. He watched her get into Dan's car, and he and Margie waved goodbye. Once the car was out of sight, Margie took Johnny's hand and led him inside, up the stairs and into the master bedroom. She turned to him, and they shared a meaningful moment. Margie felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, as she hadn't been in such a personal space with someone new since her marriage to Dan 12 years ago. Yet she felt happy and at ease. Johnny seemed strong and confident. They embraced warmly, and Margie felt a wave of relief and connection. Johnny took Margie to the bed, and as they spent time together, their bond grew. They shared fun and tender moments, enjoying each other's company. Margie felt a burst of feelings and a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. As the time went on, they remained close, sharing a comforting connection that felt both fresh and familiar. It was a special experience for both of them, marking an important change in their lives. Eventually, they lay side by side, savoring the warmth of their connection. Margie smiled at Johnny, her eyes shining with happiness. That felt amazing, she said, clearly happy about the experience. Johnny nodded, feeling the same way, and they shared a light moment, thinking about their time together. Later, they went to the kitchen. Margie warmed up some hot dogs while Johnny prepared Campari tomatoes. They enjoyed sharing a meal, chatting and laughing together. They ate slowly, looking at each other. Margie thought that a week wouldn't be enough. I want to see every room. Well, not the kids' rooms, she said. They didn't leave the house that day. They took turns showering, had dinner, and watched NewsHour. But mostly they enjoyed each other's company, becoming closer as the day went on. When midnight came, they went to sleep. On Saturday morning, they showered together and had a fun moment before deciding to wash up again. Johnny was tired, and so was Margie. They thought about going out for lunch and a hike in a nearby park. Lunch was at a nice little restaurant on the way. Simple burgers and fries with Pepsi. The hike was easy and relaxed, with no rush. That Saturday night, Johnny took Margie out dancing. The place was far enough away that they didn't worry about being seen. They both felt lively with the music. When they got to her house late, they went into the dining room eager to keep the fun going. They moved together with music playing softly. Margie enjoyed the joy of the moment and the unexpected surprise of it all. Afterward, they showered, cuddled, and went to sleep. Margie dreamed sweetly about their adventures in nature. On Sunday morning, she told Johnny about her dream. She wore a simple dress and sandals, while Johnny chose gym shorts and a t-shirt. They walked to a quiet part of the local park while church was happening nearby. They found a peaceful spot behind a small shed and some trees, taking in the soft sounds of the church music. Margie leaned against the shed, feeling easy and relaxed. Johnny joined her and they shared laughter and smiles, enjoying the moment together. After a while, they walked past the church. An older woman stood at the entrance, watching them for a moment before smiling and giving a playful gesture. Johnny chuckled, while Margie felt a bit shy. But the woman laughed along with Johnny. "I wonder where she was to see us," Johnny said. Margie replied, "I'm curious about what I'll dream about tonight." Later, Johnny and Margie shared a thrilling moment together. As they spent time together, Margie felt a rush of emotions, both excited and a bit overwhelmed by their strong connection. On Monday, they moved to Johnny's house after visiting all the rooms in Margie's home. With Johnny's neighbors nearby, they had to be a bit more careful. Still, they made the most of every chance to be together, enjoying their time as much as they could. Margie realized she was starting to fall in love, which made her feel sad because she cared deeply for her husband and family. She also knew that Johnny had his own commitments. On Thursday evening, they went out dancing and had a great time. They ended up spending the night at Margie's house since their spouses were coming back the next day. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Beth and Dan had arrived on Friday and checked into their hotel. After unpacking, they decided to freshen up and go for dinner. They shared a brief, sweet moment in the shower. Once they got dressed, they went to the hotel dining room for a nice meal. However, Dan felt a bit tired and said he wanted to save his energy for later. After dinner, they headed back to their room. With a little encouragement, Beth managed to bring back a romantic mood between them. They shared gentle moments, getting closer as the evening went on. Dan moved closer to her and she thought, "This feels nice." After a little while, they both felt content and relaxed. They shared a short embrace and he asked, "That was better, right?" "Yep," Beth replied, heading to the bathroom to freshen up. When she returned, Dan was already asleep. In that moment, Beth realized she might have made a mistake, but there was no way to change things now. She thought about Johnny and Margie and figured they were probably enjoying their time together. Eventually, she fell asleep, feeling heavy with her choices. In the middle of the night, she had a strange dream that Dan had shrunk to the size of a tiny cat. She woke up startled, not from the dream, but from Dan's snoring. The next morning, Beth woke up early and snuck into the bathroom for a shower and to brush her teeth. When she came back, Dan was awake. He gave a little reaction, but she gently said, "Brush your teeth first. Then we'll see." Dan understood and went to the bathroom. Beth watched him, thinking about everything that had happened. She decided to see how he would respond to her next request. When Dan returned, Beth was sitting on the couch, deep in thought. She spoke confidently, asking him for a small favor. Dan eagerly agreed, happy for the chance to make things right. Beth felt empowered as she watched him follow her instructions. When they finished, she pointed to the bed, suggesting it was time for a fresh start. "On your back," Beth instructed. Dan quickly turned onto his back, looking up at her. She leaned over him, taking charge of the moment. She said firmly, "Wait for my signal, do you get it?" "Yeah, Beth." Beth felt strong and in control as she guided the situation. After a while, they both calmed down, breathing steadily. Beth sat up and said, "I can see what moves you, and I'll use that. Got it?" "Yes, Beth," she smiled. "If you ask nicely, I might give you something you want." Dan hesitated, but she looked at him expectantly. He softly made his request, and she nodded, pleased with his answer. For the rest of the week, Beth enjoyed her time with Dan. They went out for dinners and shows, spending quality time together, while Beth stayed in control of their relationship. She was imaginative and confident, exploring their new bond. Eventually, their time together had to wrap up. On Thursday morning, they packed and prepared to go home. Dan was worried about how things would be when they returned to work. Beth reassured him, "Don't worry, Dan. I'll keep it professional at work, at least where others can see. We'll manage the rest privately." Dan said, "Thanks. I had a great time." Beth laughed. "So did I. Here's a little something for you." She took out a small ribbon and gave it to him with a smile. Dan felt shy but accepted it, knowing that their relationship had changed. He said, "Yes, Beth." He felt excited all the way home. It was 5:30 when Beth and Dan arrived back at Dan and Margie's house. Johnny and Margie were waiting for them. As they pulled up, Johnny and Margie waved and welcomed their spouses with warm hugs. The four didn't chat much then. Johnny took Beth's bags to their car and they drove away. On the way home, Johnny asked Beth, "So, was it what you hoped for?" She said, "That's a tricky question." "Why's that?" Beth thought about how to explain her time with Dan in Chicago. She felt a connection with Dan, but didn't believe Johnny and Dan had any reason to work closely together. No business or personal links. She replied, "At first it was tough. I felt frustrated, but then things changed. After that, our relationship grew and it became enjoyable." Johnny thought for a moment. He said, "How will things be at work?" I told him I'd keep things professional in front of others." "What does that mean? This week was supposed to end it." Beth smiled at Johnny and asked, "How was it with Margie?" Johnny paused, sensing her curiosity, but chose to be honest. "It was great. It felt as good as it ever has with you. Maybe even a little more exciting." "Did you talk about their relationship?" "No, we didn't discuss our spouses. Does she have any effect on him like you did?" "Sometimes. Not quite the same, though. I wanted to follow my own wishes, and she has a family to think about." "Yes." Beth thought for a moment. "I wonder how they are doing now. They won't pick up the kids until Saturday morning." Margie and Dan entered the house and exchanged glances. Dan had thought about what to say to Margie, but hadn't made up his mind yet. "How was your week?" she asked him. He looked down at the floor. Margie, always attuned to her husband's feelings, said, "She seemed to really affect you, didn't she?" "Yes. At first I tried to stick to the plan you suggested, but she quickly saw what I was trying to do." "So, how did it go?" "It was important." He paused, then added, "She made me promise to keep something from our time together as a keepsake." Margie was curious. "What do you mean?" Dan took a moment to think. "It feels like a fresh start for both of us." She smiled. "Oh, Danny, this could lead to some exciting times ahead." The time he spent with Beth had helped him accept his own feelings more. Margie told him to kneel in front of her and talk about everything he had done with Beth. As he spoke, she seemed to enjoy hearing it, making the moment special for them both. Afterward, she invited him to come closer, cherishing the connection between them. Even without any special plans, the moment felt lively and fun for her. She took him upstairs, where they both shared more joyful moments together. After a while, she started to tease him playfully, reminding him that she was in charge. He responded happily, fully engaged, while she continued to enjoy their time together. She mentioned her past experiences with Johnny, reminding him of their shared memories, which sparked his interest. Then she went to freshen up, telling him to stay where he was. When she returned, she gave him a task, showing her authority. He followed her instructions without any hesitation. When Johnny and Beth came home, she asked him if he still wanted to be with Margie. He said yes, but shared his worries, showing concern for her well-being. Though she was a bit upset, she accepted this part of their arrangement. They went upstairs together, where Beth made sure their bond stayed strong. Later in the weekend, they all had a great time together, with Margie and Dan taking their kids out, while the evenings were filled with Margie solidifying her role in their connection. On Monday morning, Margie sent him off to work, reminding him of their relationship. At work, he felt a bit nervous about Beth, knowing they had some things to sort out when he saw her arrive. Dan called Beth into his office to share his thoughts about their unusual setup. Beth noticed he seemed open and checked in with him about his talks with Margie, hoping to ease any worries he might have about their plans going forward. "He's serious about this. It applies here too," he said. "Okay." Beth smiled at him. "But that doesn't mean you get off easily. Do you still have the ribbon?" "Yes, she made me wear it." "Let me see it." He showed her the ribbon without hesitation. She laughed. "Wow, that's a big one. Margie's lucky to have it." After that, Beth left the office. It wasn't easy for Dan to quickly gather himself afterward. For 2 months, things continued like this. Johnny and Beth fell back into their usual routine, but it took some adjustment. They both felt a bit uncertain about each other, as Beth had her own wishes. But gradually, things started to feel more stable. At work, Beth kept some distance from Dan. Sometimes she asked to see the ribbon when they were alone, but she never took it further. Deep down, she was curious. One day, Beth got a call from Margie. "Beth, can we have lunch? I need to talk to you," Margie said. "Sure, but..." "Let's meet at Giorgio's tomorrow. I'll get a booth." They ended the call. That night, Beth shared the lunch plan with Johnny. He was interested and glad she told him. The next day at 1 o'clock, Beth and Margie sat together in a private booth at the restaurant. They both opted for salads and bread, skipping any drinks. After they placed their orders, Beth looked at Margie. "I want to see Johnny again every so often," Margie said. "I think about him. I know I can't have him completely, but..." Beth responded cautiously. "We're just starting to return to normal after everything that happened. I'm not sure I can. You don't have to be with Dan. You can if you want, but it's not necessary." Beth thought about this. It was her suggestion that had led to this whole situation. "I'll think about it. I'll talk to Johnny." "Okay. Just so you know, with Dan... it feels different now. He doesn't just meet my needs. I need to feel a sense of ownership. You made him someone who serves. I value him, but it's changed." "That's a big change." "Definitely, but Johnny won't let me be with Dan again. But I might consider you. We'll see." That was how they left things after finishing their meals. Later that evening, Beth spoke to Johnny about Margie's idea. Johnny said firmly that he wouldn't agree to a swap. "What about just one night with Margie? No swap. I feel like I owe you," Beth offered. He said he would think about it. Beth was sure he'd agree in the end. The next day was important at Beth's law firm, with a meeting set up between the merger team and the owner of TLC regarding the license. No one knew who owned the company. Johnny was eager for the meeting. He had a plan that suggested raising the fee for the license a lot. At 10 o'clock, Dan, Beth, another lawyer, and a paralegal waited in the large conference room for the unknown owner of TLC. A knock came at the door, and a secretary brought in Jerry Dolan and Johnny. Beth was surprised, and Dan quickly stood up. Johnny greeted them with a friendly, "How are you all?" Jerry said, "I think we all know each other." Beth put her head down on the table. Dan sat back down. Johnny continued, "I'm sorry for surprising you like this. At first I thought your firm wasn't doing well, but then I understood that you had no way of knowing who I was. So I decided to wait." He turned to Beth and said, "I couldn't talk to you without putting your role at risk, so I held back. Now I see what the license means for you, and I have the advantage." Beth asked, "Why would you do this, Johnny?" He answered, "You know I had to stay quiet, but now I'm ready to speak." He glanced at Dan, too. Jerry said, "I have the proposal ready." He handed out papers to the 3 lawyers and the paralegal, who was a pleasant young woman. Dolan noticed this detail. Beth was the first to start reading. Dan and another lawyer named William followed. Beth looked up first and said to Johnny, "You're going to do well here." Johnny replied, "I could do even better, but as you probably see, I'm already quite successful." Dan asked, "Is this a formal offer?" Johnny responded, "Almost. There's one thing we need to talk about, Dan. Can we find a private room?" The secretary was called, and Dan and Johnny went into a small room down the hall. Dan asked, "What's this about? If it's personal..." "It is. I'm open to a deal that is good for everyone, but I want to talk to your wife." Dan was shocked and paused. He remembered their last conversation, and his face grew warm with feelings. Johnny said, "You tried to involve yourself in my life. We both know how that turned out. But Margie and I have a connection now. I want to meet her once a month on the first Saturday." Dan replied, "She won't agree to that." Johnny smiled. "I think she will. It won't really change your marriage, just one night a month." "Do I get to discuss this with Beth?" "No, that option is gone. I can't agree to that." "Not permanently, Dan. And based on what I know about you, I believe you might think about it once you consider the possibilities. Imagine her coming home to you after a weekend away, feeling happy and refreshed. What fun she could have with you," someone said. "That's not your business," Dan replied. Usually he kept work and personal life separate, but that wasn't easy now. He explained, "It's like I'm letting you decide for her. She's not just a tool. If she says no, that's fine. You're just agreeing not to get in the way if she chooses yes. You're allowing her to make her decision, and it might not be as bad as you think. You could even get used to it," Johnny said with a knowing smile. Dan felt defeated. He looked away, unable to face Johnny. "I agree," he said quietly. The two men returned to the conference room where they signed the papers. Another agreement, unspoken but heavy, lingered in Dan's mind. Johnny and Beth left the meeting together. Johnny had arrived with Jerry Dolan, and Beth drove him back to their place. During the ride, Beth asked about the side meeting. She was no longer angry about the surprise. She had thought about it and found some reason in Johnny's words. Still, she was curious. "Johnny, what did you and Dan talk about?" she asked. "Margie," he answered. "Oh, well, I did say you had some freedom. I assume you'll use it," she replied. "Yes, the first Saturday of every month." "No, he agreed to that. Yes, he's pretty open to it. But I didn't agree to anything long-term. I know Beth, and trust me, I wouldn't want to lose you, but Margie and I have a connection. Maybe there's room for both of you." Beth looked at him in disbelief. "You're impossible." Johnny parked the car in the driveway and turned to her. "Maybe someday." She sat quietly thinking about everything. Johnny watched her as she considered it. He took her hand and led her inside. It took some time, but eventually she agreed. And so, an unusual arrangement began. It lasted for over a year, even through Beth's pregnancy. For the last few months, Johnny and Margie continued without Beth's involvement. Once Elizabeth was born, Beth worked hard to get back to herself. By that time, she and Margie had become friends. At first, Dan was uneasy about it all, but when Margie came home that first time, she made an impression he could never forget. After that, he was more accepting. As for Livia and William had to make some compromises to keep their marriage on good terms and avoid a messy separation. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.